أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين صلى الله والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع ذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون. يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. ألم يروا كما أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون. وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون. وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون. وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون. والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى دق الأرجون القديم. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذرية في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون. وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين. وإذا وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم انفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا نطعم من لو يشاء الله وأطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في السور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مركدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين ونعبدونه هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا فلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لتمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مزيا ولا يرجعون ومن نؤمره ننكسه في الخلق فلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الفاتحة
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله يا إمام الرحمة يا سيدنا ومولانا. إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي يا ابن أبي طالب يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا. إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا. إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله اشفعي لنا عند الله. يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا. إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا. إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا. إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا. إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله قدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي يا ابن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها الزكي العسكري يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وسي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا سادتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله، وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله، فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله، فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله، وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو النجاة من الله، فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا سادتي ويا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين. ولعن الله أعداء الله ظالمين من الأولين والآخرين، آمين رب العالمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن أمير المؤمنين وإمام المتقين عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم اجعل قلبي بارا وعيشي قارا وعملي سارا ورزقي دارا وأولادي أبرارا، واجعل لي من قبر نبيك محمد المصطفى صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم مستقرا وقرارا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. اللهم صل على. هيا على الصلاة، هيا على الصلاة، هيا على الفلاح، هيا على الفلاح، هيا على خير العمل، هيا على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أعطيناك الكوثر فصل لربك وانحر إن شانئك هو الأبتر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة والرضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا الله يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. الله أكبر. الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إنه ليس لي علم بموضع رزقي وإنما أطلبه بخطرات تخطر على قلبي فأجول في طلبه البلدان فأنا فيما أنا طالب كالحيران لا أدري في سهل هو أم في جبل أم في أرض أم في سماء أم في بر أم في بحر وعلى يدي من قبل من وقد علمت أن علمه عندك وأسبابه بيدك وأنت الذي تقسمه بلطفك وتسببه برحمتك. اللهم فصل على محمد وآله واجعل يا ربي رزقك لي واسعا ومطلبه سهلا ومأخذه قريبا ولا تعنني بطلب ما لم تقدر لي فيه رزقا فإنك غني عن عذابي وأنا فقير إلى رحمتك. فصل على محمد وآله وجد على عبدك بفضلك إنك ذو فضل عظيم.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Very quickly from last night, if anyone can remind me the mas'ala that we went through. Shak. What about shak? What is the meaning of shak? When you're 50-50. Yes, if you're 60-40, 70-30, that is no longer considered to be shak. If, say for example, I stand up for salah, I'm standing up for a new rak'ah. In Salat al-Fajr, I've just stood up for my second rak'ah, and I doubt. The shak enters my mind. What's the ruling here? Anyone has a different opinion? The salah is batil. Any shak that emanates in a 2 rak'ah salah, salah is batil. Whether it's mustahab, whether it's wajib. Whether you're in Salat al-Qasr, for example, you're in the state of travel, Dhuhr, Isha and Asr is now 2 rak'ah for you. If you doubt in these salawat, your salah is batil. If in Maghrib, for example, I have a doubt, is this my second rak'ah or my third rak'ah? What's the ruling? Void. Yes? Any salah which is 2 rak'ah or 3 rak'ah, shak within it makes the salah batil. In the 4 rak'ah salah, sorry, go on.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What if you're in Jamaat and you have a doubt, but you know that the Imam will correct?
Ahsant. If you're in Jama'ah, ignore the doubt. It's not your responsibility, it's the responsibility of the Imam. Yeah? So basically you just have to follow the Imam. In a 4 rak'ah namaz, I have a doubt. When is this doubt valid? And when is it invalid? Does the question make sense first? Yeah?
If you doubt in your second rak'ah, then of course it's invalid. If it is in your third or fourth rak'ah, then you have got different masail for that.
Okay. Anyone else? In a 4 rak'ah namaz, say for example Salat al-Isha, I'm reciting Salat al-Isha. If the doubt appears in the first rak'ah, Salah is batil. If the doubt appears in the second rak'ah, Salah is batil. When is the doubt valid? In between. Not exactly in the third rak'ah, but in between somewhere. Where?
If the doubt is between 3 or 4, 4 or 5.
No. So the doubt that appears in my mind is valid from which point onwards? After the second sajda? As soon as I go into the second sajda, any doubt that appears, that's when the rules of Shakiyat Salah come into place. Any doubt that appears before me going into the second sajda, it invalidates the Salah. Yes, so after the second rak'ah finishes, I've gone into sujood, I've gotten up, astaghfirullah rabbi wa atubu ilay. Once I go into sajda second time, any doubt that comes after that point, the salah is still valid, and then I have to now perform the ahkam of shakiyat salah. Now, say for example, I stand up for my third rak'ah, for Salat al-Isha. I doubt, is this my third rak'ah or is it my fourth rak'ah? What is the ruling here? No idea. One person is saying no idea.
Consider it as your fourth rak'ah.
As your
Third rak'ah. So I'm doubting between number 3 and number 4. What do I do?
Consider it as your fourth rak'ah and then do one rak'ah namaz at.
Okay, so one person here is saying consider it as your fourth. One person in the back is saying consider it as your third. What do you do? Consider it as fourth. You're saying it with yaqeen? 100%? Yeah, wasi is 100% ahl al-yaqeen. Anyone else? If you doubt between 2, 3 or 4, always take the higher number. If you're doubting between 3 and 4, always take the highest number. Keep that in mind. If you're doubting between 2 and 4, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, always take it as the highest number. So here in this example, I'm doubting between 3 and 4, you take number 4. Yes, after you finish your salah, before breaking your salah, yes, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Usually you can move around now, yes, you can check your phones, but in this case you can't. Yeah, once you can't move around. Once you move around, your salah is batil. What you do is after you finish your salah, you stand up and you recite one rak'ah salat al-ihtiyat. Now there's a specific way to recite salat al-ihtiyat. We'll go through that in the coming nights, inshallah. Yes, so the idea is if you're doubting between a lesser number and a greater number, take the greater number. That's the common rule. But if you're doubting between it being 4 or 5 or 4 and 6, that's a different ruling. Obviously, you can't take number 5 or number 6. Yes, you have to take number 4 as the asl, as the origin, and then finish your salah. We'll come to that ahkam later on. The idea behind this is that if, say for example, in reality, I was in my third rak'ah, but I took it as my fourth, the salat al-ihtiyat compensates for it. The one rak'ah that I performed afterward compensates for that. If I was to build on number 3 and say, okay, this is my third rak'ah, but in reality I was in number 4, then the salat al-ihtiyat that I would have performed afterwards would have made it 5 rak'ah. Does that make sense? I would have performed an extra rak'ah. So here the fuqaha say, always build on the highest. Take it as number 4, and then perform salat al-ihtiyat afterwards, 1 rak'ah. Ahsant.
السلام عليك يا سلطان أبا الحسن علي بن موسى الرضا كن شفيعنا وشفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب العصر والزمان، الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمامنا وإمام الإنس والجان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وزهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله صل على
محمد وآل محمد صلوات. اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. کیسا ہے یہ چراغ دل ڈوب جا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے. ہونے لگی اذانیں کیسے سروں کو جانپے بازو بندھے ہوئے ہیں. خون رو رہے ہیں آنکھوں سے خون رستے خون میں نہا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. سجاد کا کلیجہ صد پاش ہو رہا ہے. ایک ایک زخم ان کا اس غم میں رو رہا ہے. زینب کا نام لے کر آدھا بلا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. نیزے پہ جتنے سر ہے ایک سر ہے ان میں سا. آنکھیں ہیں بند اس کی اور خاک پر ہے گرتا. عباس کا یہ سر ہے تیور بتا رہے ہیں. کیا شام آ گیا ہے. اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. اتنا چلے ہیں پیدل کانٹوں پہ سارے قیدی تھک جاتی چلتے چلتے چلتی اگر زمیں بھی پیروں کے آبلے بھی آنسو بہا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں لوگ کس طرح کے ہم سے دعا کرے ایک دیو دعا دو یہ دن ہم پنائیں لے کر دعائیں ہم سے دل بھی دکھا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں ماؤں کے گودیوں سے لپٹے ہوئے ہیں بچے ہیں ہاتھ رسیوں میں ماؤں کے ایس جکرے بچے جو گر رہے ہیں وہ مرتے جا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں ریحان کے دیوں میں برپا تھا شور گریا پلکوں سے کر رہی تھی ماتم جو بنت زہرا سجاد نوح خواہ ہے نوحہ سنا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں کیسا ہے یہ چراغ دل ڈوب جا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں محمد وعلی محمد صلوات
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع لذنوبنا وتبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات والله بما تعملون خبير. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We all know the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, in which they begin to emphasize the importance of gaining knowledge. As Muslims, as followers of the Holy Quran, being part of the madhab of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, you realize there's a lot of emphasis from the Ahlul Bayt themselves encouraging their followers to gain knowledge. طلب العلم فريضة لكل مسلم ومسلمة. That gaining knowledge is a farida, it's wajib, it's considered to be compulsory, something mandatory for all Muslims and Muslimas. And so you find that even from the scholars, there's a heavy encouragement for people to learn aspects of their religion as much as possible. Beyond the age of the madrasa, for example, a person should always be in the constant state of learning the religion of Islam. What's interesting is that within the Holy Quran, when Allah begins to speak about Ahl al-Ilm, He distinguishes them in a very subtle way. He distinguishes them by comparing them with those who have no ilm. So you find, for example, there's a verse in the Holy Quran, قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِيَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِيَ الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. A rhetorical question is raised here. Are those who know and those who do not know equal in your eyes? Are they the same? Are they the same? Of course not. Any rational mind will come and tell you there's a difference between an alim and a person who's not considered to be amongst the ulama. Imagine a person who enters a forest, a dark forest. He has no light, no lamp, no phone to help him, guide him through the forest. The example of this is the example of a person who has no knowledge. He lives in this world, but he's surrounded by darkness. There is no light to guide him, to give him a purpose in life. And so he can fall into many different traps, many different dangers that's there before him. A person who is an alim, a person who has ilm, this is a weapon that he has. It's a torch that he carries in his hands. When he enters this dark forest, he can see everything that is there around him. If there are dangers, he can step over these dangers and he can find his way into the other side of the forest. Likewise, a person who is an alim, a person who has ilm. Forget an alim, leave aside an alim, a person who has ilm with regards to his, for example, belief in Allah, belief in the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He can guide himself in this world. He can find, for example, the different dangers that are there before him and he can traverse past it. So here in this verse, Allah asks a rhetorical question. Those who know and those who do not know, are they considered to be the same? Likewise, in other areas of the Holy Quran, in this verse that I began with, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and then there are those who believe and we have given them ilm. And when we give them ilm, we raise them in darajat. So there's a difference between those who have ilm and those who do not have ilm. Those who have ilm, they increase their proximity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in multiple levels compared to those who do not have ilm. Let me give you an example. If you have a person like you and I, we recite salah. Yes, there is a specific thawab that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. The act of ibadah that we perform is different to the ibadah performed by an alim. Why is it different? Because the alim has ilm, far greater than our ilm. The alim, when he stands for prayer, he understands the philosophy behind prayers. He understands the importance of prayers. He knows exactly where the asl, the source of prayer has come from. He can link it with the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. All that knowledge is there in his mind. That knowledge is then transmitted, it's transferred practically in his life, and he then engages in prayer. Would you say that the thawab of the person who has no ilm is equal to the thawab of a person who has ilm, especially when it comes to actions of ibadat? Of course not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whenever a person increases in his ilm, the weightiness of his ibadat becomes It's reinforced, it's solidified, it becomes much more weighty. More thawab is reserved for a person who has ilm when he engages in ibadat compared to a person who has no ilm and yet he engages in ibadat. Nowadays you have people in the community they go the other direction. They have no ilm and then they choose that because of the lack of ilm they should move away from ibadat. No, ibadat, something that is considered to be wajib is wajib whether you like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, as we mentioned in the other night with regards to the sharia of the religion of Islam. Just because we don't understand the philosophy behind certain ahkam doesn't make us give us the opportunity to move away from it. No, we increase our knowledge. We try and understand why certain ahkam exist the way they exist. So you find that there is a subtle difference between an alim and a person who is just a worshipper, an alim and a person who does not have ilm. Beyond this, you find that ilm has a profound effect in the life of the human being. How so? It affects the akhlaq of the human being. Not only does it affect his ibadat and the reward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him, but it affects his akhlaq as well. In which way? The more ilm a person has, the more dangers he is aware of in terms of his actions. We speak about the whole science of emotional intelligence, isn't it? The idea of an alim, the person who, for example, is aware, very much aware of his actions, his emotions. An alim knows exactly how to direct his emotions and his desires towards the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He may confront certain passions, certain desires, but then he may stop himself in the way and he may direct that passion and desire for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The whole concept of infallibility, when we speak about the infallibility of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam, Allahumma salli ala. AV room, there's a slight feedback in the sound. If you can sort that out, please. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The whole idea of the Ahlul Bayt and the infallibility of the Ahlul Bayt. What's the source of infallibility? It's knowledge. The Ahlul Bayt, for example, even the Anbiya, yes, they're not programmed to refrain from sins like robots. Like the angels are programmed to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without desires. The Ahlul Bayt as well as the Ma'sumeen, the Anbiya, they have knowledge of the effects of many of these sins. Whether it be emotional ramifications of performing sins, psychological disadvantages, whether it be, for example, the idea of it hurting the human body or hurting the society as a whole. You find that the Anbiya as well as the Ahlul Bayt move away from sins because they can see the effects of those sins. When they asked Imam al-Rida alayhi salatu wasalam, why do you not commit sins? He says, we know the effects of sins. Imagine placing, for example, your hands in the toilets, for example. Would you do that? The companion says no. He says, well, that's the effect. Because you know that it's not something that you would engage in. It's dirty, it's filthy, it's disgusting. Yes, just as how you would not perform this particular action, there are sins that we do not perform because we can see the actions of these sins, the effects of these sins. Today, in this day and age, for example, there are certain things that we refrain from. If a plate of food was given to you, regardless of how expensive the dish is, if it's rotten, would you eat it? No, because you know that it could affect your body. It could affect, for example, the next day. Yes, it could affect you in a very negative way. Regardless of how expensive the meal is, you would stay away from it because you know the effects of eating such a meal. Likewise, a person, when he engages in his ilm, he moves away from sinning altogether. Today, for example, when you go towards the Maraja, in fact, a very interesting story which is attributed and associated with Ayatollah al-Bahjat Marhom rahmatullah alayh. They say a man came towards him and he said, Ayatollah, teach me something. Or give me knowledge. Today, for example, people in our communities, Maulana, give us knowledge. Ayatollah replies, he says, what do you want knowledge for? Whatever you know at this moment in time, practice it. Translate your knowledge into practice. That action in itself will allow you to increase spiritually. Today you go towards our Maraja, for example, in Najaf al-Ashraf. You're sitting in front of a Maraja, a Deen, who's been a Maraja for many decades, and you ask him, in your studies, that you've been studying the religion of Islam 80, 90 years, what advice can you give us as mu'mineen? You're Ahl al-Hadith, you're Ahl al-Quran. Yes, you know the Ahl al-Bayt better than we do. What advice do you have for us? You'll find one answer given all the time. Refrain from that which is haram, engage in that which is wajib. Why? Because the theory of what you know about the religion of Islam, applied practically in your lives. This is how a person moves towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When there is ilm, you find that naturally that ilm will promote the person towards good and will dissociate the person from evil. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Very interestingly, there's a hadith from Nabi Isa alayhi salam. Nabi Isa, one day he turns towards his companions and he says to them, I advise you to sit alongside the ulama. Sit with the ulama, be in their presence. One of the companions, he asks Nabi Allah Isa, he says, why? What's the wisdom behind this? He says, there are 3 pieces of wisdom that you can learn from this. He says, sit with the ulama because the ulama remember you or remind you of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have this today. In my own personal experience, when you look at the face of an alim, there is nothing that you remember from the dunya. Your mind goes towards deen, it goes towards the Ahlul Bayt, it goes towards the religion of Islam, it goes towards akhirah, it goes towards the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you're sitting there in front of the marja of your time, a person who has dedicated his entire life studying the religion of Islam, you feel spiritual. Why do you feel spiritual? The person is weak. The person is fragile. The person is very frail. Yet you feel spiritually strong just by sitting alongside him. He says, sit alongside the ulama because they remind you of the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They give you that shock, that boost. And that you should focus your energy and your priorities towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he says, sit alongside the ulama because whenever they speak, they give benefit. They share knowledge with you. There are many in our communities, for example, many in our workplaces, many in our colleges and universities. They can talk for hours and hours and hours without it being any benefit for you. Or you could talk for hours without being a benefit for anyone else. He says, sit with the ulama. And see how silent they are. Sometimes the ulama, they won't say anything unless you ask them something. The ulama, when they speak words of wisdom. They share knowledge. And you will definitely benefit from them and their presence. And then thirdly, he says, sit with the ulama. Because the ulama are those, through their actions, it will create an interest for you towards the hereafter. Many a times because of our work, because of our desires, we forget the hereafter. We live only for tomorrow, but not for the hereafter. Our priorities are swayed completely, 100%. It says, sit with the ulama because the ulama, they will remind you of the hereafter. They will motivate you to work for your hereafter. And so you find there are many ulama from our madhab. When you read their biographies, inshallah, today we will share the biography of the Marhom, Samahat Sayyid Muhammad Saeed Al-Hakim, who passed away just a few days ago. I'll go through his biography very briefly to see how influential of a personality he was in this world as long as he was alive, and how people were attracted to him not just because of his knowledge but because of his akhlaq. You find that even then, even when he was young, he would always sit alongside the ulama, and he himself testified that I learned more from the ulama, from their private gatherings, than sitting in their classes. So you find that Nabi Allah Isa, he sees a wisdom behind the idea of sharing your company with the ulama, being in their presence, learning from them. And of course, when you come to the idea of ulama and the idea of gaining knowledge, you find that there is a very beautiful notion presented to us by the ulama themselves. And they say that with regards to the Ahl al-Ilm, leave aside their knowledge of the religion of Islam. Leave aside their legacy and the heritage that they leave behind. Focus on their discipline. Look how disciplined individuals they are. Today, in the life that we have, for example, living in the West, especially in this century, I tell you, one of the common problems in our communities, especially amongst the youth, is that we get bored. We get bored very easily. And there is not a single thing that we can do for a moment of time. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you find that the person moves from one activity to another. Our attention span has depleted. Our boredom has increased. You find that, for example, a person who has hobbies, a few weeks later he'll jump to another hobby. He'll jump to a third hobby, jump to a fourth hobby. It's very difficult for a person to have a hobby that stays for a period of time. When you find, for example, the businessman in our community, one day he'll have this business, a few years later he'll have another business, a few years later he'll have another business. Why? He says, I want to explore certain opportunities that I have. I want to spread out my skill sets. Complacency is what people are afraid of. One of the greatest dangers in our lives is complacency. Once you become complacent, that's it. There's no growth for you in terms of business, in terms of your workplace. So a person is always enticing himself, a person is always encouraging himself, motivating himself to explore new things and new ideas. When you look at the ulama are those who are disciplined from a very young age. At the age of 10, they enter the hawza, they enter the seminaries until their final moments. At the age of 80, at the age of 90, at the age of 100, you find them still studying the religion of Islam. Yes, their bodies have weakened. Their muscles have weakened. For example, levels of energy has depleted gradually over the years. But their motivation and their love and passion for learning Islam, reading Islam has become strong. It strengthens over the years. You'll find in the past year, because of COVID, we've lost a number of ulama. Many of their pictures have come out and have been published of their final moments. Many of them sitting in their beds, their deathbeds, ventilators hooked up to their bodies, breathing machines and apparatuses. But you find them always with a book in their hands, writing notes, reading something, with the hope that if they leave the hospitals, the next day they can go back and they can teach their students. What passion is this? This is discipline, something that is inspirational for each and every one of us. Today we lack, for example, inspiration. We lack the idea of always having a passion for something. Look at the ulama. Reading, writing, learning, teaching. This is a discipline that they had and they have maintained over the years. There is no excuse for each and every one of us to say that, look, you know what? In this day and age, it's not possible. Well, we have examples of people doing it. We have examples of people who have disassociated themselves from this world. They have a particular goal and they have maintained that goal over the decades. 8, 9 decades, they've been consistent in that goal and in that passion. There's an interesting hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Beautiful hadith. He says, Al-ilm aktharu min an yuhata bih. He says, ilm is so vast. It's so vast. It is impossible to know everything. And it's true. If you were to compare knowledge, information that we have today, you would equate it to the drops of the oceans and the seas. Isn't it? You would equate ilm to the drops of the oceans and the seas. It's vast. You can compare, for example, the wealth of the people in the community. You can say that this person is the highest paid person in the community, and this person is the poorest person in the community. When it comes to strength, again, you can compare strength amongst human beings. But ilm is something that you can't compare. Ilm, you can't say that this person is more knowledgeable than another person. Amir al-Mu'mineen says that knowledge is so vast, it's impossible for a person to know everything. So what does a person do in this regards? A person, he looks for that which is beneficial for him. When you look at the ocean, there are certain jewels, there are certain things that we eat from the ocean. So who do we refer to? We refer to the fishermen. Yes, the fisherman knows exactly which part of the oceans you go towards so you can fish and you'll get the best schools of fish in that area. They wouldn't just throw the nets anywhere in the ocean with the hope that fishes come. He says, no. In the vast oceans, there is a particular area. You go to that area and you fish and you'll get the best fishes. If you're looking for example, sharks, if you want to scuba dive, that area or that area. If you want to look at whales and dolphins, you go towards that area. The fisherman is very much proficient with regards to the areas of the ocean. He knows exactly where to go, where to find certain things. Likewise, an alim. An alim, he sees knowledge in front of him. An alim recognizes that all knowledge with regards to the religion of Islam is good. If you're interested in philosophy, that's good. If you're interested in aqaid, that's good. If you're interested in fiqh, that's good. If you're interested, for example, in rijal, that's good. But an alim recognizes knowledge that is beneficial for him, useful for him. Many a times you'll find people in the community, they'll spend years studying rijal. What's the point? What's the point of studying Rijal? How does that make a difference in you and your life right now? You want to be an academic? Fine. That's between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You'll find certain people, they study with what end? There is a difference between knowledge and beneficial knowledge. Both are good, but one is better than the other. And the dua, what do we have? A'udhu billahi min ilmi la yanfa. Ya Allah, protect me from the knowledge that has no benefit for me. We may read a particular book, we may read a particular chapter, we may be enticed by it, and we may love it, but at the end of the day, after, for example, reading a particular topic, you realize, you know what, I wasted my time of studying all of this, because there was no benefit in it for me in the end. An alim, when he enters the vast seas of knowledge and the oceans of knowledge, he knows exactly what he needs, and he takes from it. An alim is someone who recognizes the knowledge, beneficial knowledge, from that knowledge which is not beneficial. There are many in our communities today, for example, they say, I don't need an alim to study the religion of Islam, especially when all of the lectures and lessons are online now. There's no need for me to keep in touch with the ulama. We say, no, the ulama, they are valuable because they can help you determine and understand and acknowledge true knowledge from knowledge that is not beneficial for you. So here, from this respect, you find that Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, when he says that knowledge is vast, such that you can drown yourselves in certain areas with no avail in the end, protect yourselves by always linking up with an alim. An alim is someone who can differentiate knowledge from knowledge that is beneficial from knowledge that is not very much beneficial for you. When you therefore look at the struggles of the ulama, it is because of the ulama we are who we are today. Our culture, the way it's formed, it is formed because of an alim once upon a time. The aza of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam exists because of the ulama. The knowledge of the Ahl al-Bayt, the many du'as that we have, dua al-Kumail, dua yastashir, dua al-Nudba, you find that the ulama have taken on the responsibilities to explain, to explain the different sentences of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. Voluminous books have been written just explaining the different ziyarat and the du'as that we have from the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. You find, for example, the struggles of the ulama, the endeavors of the ulama, they have helped preserve our fiqh. They have helped preserve our aqidah. They have helped preserve the wilayah of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam. Not only that, many have come towards tashayyu', the religion or the madhab of Shia Islam, because of the guidance of the ulama. And we are indebted to them. In the past few days, we lost a valuable personality. Ayatollah al-Marhom Sayyid Mohammed Saeed At-Tabatabai Al-Hakim. You will not believe how fundamental and profound this personality was. This personality, the struggles that he went through in his life, the endeavors that he sought and he went through, the publications that he engaged in, the families that he supported. It was amazing to know him personally, and of course to see how people were inspired just by being in his presence. That's senior figures from all over the world. Foreigners used to come towards him and they used to sit with him, and he used to give his time explaining and answering many of their questions. They say that the Ayatollah al-Marhum, Sayyid, was born in Najaf al-Ashraf, in the family of Al-Hakim. Now Al-Hakim, for those of you who do not know, they are the scholarly family in Najaf al-Ashraf, very famous. From the lines of Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim rahmatullah alayh. They say Sayyid al-Muhsin al-Hakim used to be his maternal grandfather, so his mother's father, the marja of the time. His father was Sayyid Muhammad Ali al-Hakim. Again, a senior figure within the Hawza, someone who used to teach the advanced levels in the seminaries, and someone who was very well respected as an alim. In fact, his father died at the age of 103, just about 11 years ago. In 2010, his father passed away. So they say that these two key figures played a very fundamental role in his upbringing. His father, they say, he took on his son's training, Sayyid Muhammad Saeed al-Marhum, from a very young age. At the age of, I think, less than 10, as according to the biographers, he enters the Hawza just before reaching the age of 10. When he entered the Hawza, he began studying the Muqaddimat. He began studying the preliminaries to the Hawza studies. And his father taught him directly. His father was key. He was part and parcel of his upbringing, especially on an academic level. Then he taught him all the way to the levels of advanced studies, Sutuh. When he finished this particular level, they say he began learning the Hawza studies, Bahth al-Kharij, the advanced studies under his grandfather, Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, number one. Number two, under Sayyid al-Khu'i rahmatullah alayhi as well. And number three, a man, a Sheikh, an Ayatullah who went by the name of Sheikh Husayn Al-Hilli. Sheikh Husayn Al-Hilli, they say he was on the same par as Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim as well as Sayyid al-Khu'i rahmatullah alayhima. Except that they came towards him, the people in Najaf, the ulama, the Ahl al-Khabra, they came towards him and they said, Shaykhna, why don't you announce your marja'iyya? You're very much considered to be part of Ahl al-Marja'iyya. Why don't you announce your marja'iyya? He said, there's no interest in me for becoming a marja'. So even though he was on the same level as the two maraja of the time, he had no interest in becoming a marja'. Rather, he was more focused on teaching the next generations of the ulama. Amongst them was Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim. So they say Shaykh al-Husayn al-Hilli used to teach his students, Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim. Sayyid al-Hakim himself narrates, he says that I benefited more sitting with this Shaykh outside of his lessons than I would from his lessons directly. The importance of sitting with the ulama is profound within our religion. Sometimes many of us will learn sitting, for example, outside of the Majlis than we do within the Majlis with the alim. So you find that he comes forward and he says, I learned more from him through his akhlaq, through the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, more outside of his lessons than sitting in his lessons. There's a Sayyid by the name of Sayyid Mufti al-Shia al-Musawi. He comes forward and he says, I remember in our younger days, Sayyid Sa'id al-Hakim, Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim, he used to be the youngest student of Shaykh Husayn al-Hilli, the youngest student. At the same time, despite his age, his munaqasha, his challenges towards the teacher was great compared to all of us. Whenever the teacher would present an argument, Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Hakim would challenge that argument. He would constantly challenge Shaykh Husayn al-Hilli. Despite his young age, his mind was on a different level altogether. What's interesting is that Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, his grandfather, there was a very interesting book that he's written. A book which is a compendium in fiqh known as Mustamsik Urwat al-Wuthqa. Now there's a very interesting story behind how he wrote this particular book. Mustamsik Urwat al-Wuthqa, they say Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, when he decided to write this compendium on fiqh, he needed a reference to a different book by the name of Jawahir al-Kalam fi Sharh Shara'i al-Islam. Many volumes, many volumes. But as you know, buying books is not something cheap. It's very, very expensive. When you speak to the students of the Hawza, they have to choose between buying food and clothes or buying books. That's some of the situation of many of the students of the Hawza. They say Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, when he decided to write his book, Mustamsik Urwat al-Wuthqa, he needed to use Jawahir al-Kalam. But he had no access to this book. None of the libraries had it. None of his teachers had it, except for one person. One of his colleagues, one of his peers had a copy of this book. And of course, he doesn't have the money to go buy his own copy. So he came towards his friend. He said, look, you have a copy of Jawahir al-Kalam. I need to use it for my research. Is it possible for me to borrow a volume at a time? When I'm done, I can return the volume back to you. Now, as you know, the ulama, they're very hesitant in lending books because they know that once they lend that book, they'll never see it again. So they're quite stingy when it comes to lending books. So he said, look, Sayyidina, with all respect and humility, I can't give you the book. He said, fine, I understand, and I completely resonate in what you believe in, but how about if I come to your house? Every day for a few hours, I'll sit in your house, I'll perform my research, I'll do my research, and then I'll leave. I will make sure that the book does not leave your property. He says, Sayyidina, my house is small. I have a wife, I have children. This is an inconvenience for them. It's like, I don't mind you coming to my house for a few hours every day. I would benefit from that, but it would be an inconvenience for my family. Sayyid Muhsin al-Hakim, he says, look, you have a copy of that book. I need access to that book to write my research. How about this? How about I come sit outside of your doorstep? You can lend me the volume of the book. I will sit outside of your doorstep, and I will conduct my research. When I'm done, I'll knock on the door and I'll give you your book back. His friend, his colleague agrees to this. Every day he would come sit outside his friend's house by his doorstep and he would conduct his research. Mustamsik Urwat al-Wafqa. Many volumes, compendium on fiqh. There is not a single mujtahid today, and I say this, there is not a single mujtahid today that refers to his book. They all research and they all refer back to his book because of the amount of knowledge that is transcribed within it. In the heat of Najaf al-Ashraf, some of us, alhamdulillah, we've been for Najaf, yes, during the days of Arafah, during the days of Karbala. You can imagine how hot it was at that time. Imagine in the heat of summer, in the heat, scorching heat of the summers in Najaf, he would sit outside of the door writing, researching, writing his book. In the cold of the winter as well, for those of you who've been in the winter, you know how cold it gets. We're talking about the 1960s. There's no ACs available for anyone. And of course, the issues with the electricity, which are still prevalent today in Najaf al-Ashraf, you find that it's very difficult for an alim to sit outside the doorstep of another just writing away. But he does so, he perseveres. They say when the time came when he wanted to publish his book, he assigned his grandson, Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim. He said, take this book of mine. Take it, read through it, research, reference all of the points that I have made. Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id, he takes the book of his grandfather. He references all of the points that he's made, researching, linking it to all the different references that he could find. This was a task assigned to him specifically. This is beautiful. His grandfather saw something different in his grandson and gave him one of his best works to look after. Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim began to work on his grandfather's work. Then he would come back to his grandfather, he would sit with him, he would debate with him, he would challenge him. He would challenge his own grandfather with regards to many of his opinions, many of the structures, many of his references. And Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim was respected because of this. His knowledge was something unique given to him at his time, that even his grandfather, the Marja of the time, recognized this, acknowledged it, and nurtured it in the best of ways. In 1983, they say Saddam al-Hussein imprisoned majority of the family of Hakim. You find that Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim then enters the prisons. For 9 years, from 1983 to 1991, he's in prison. When he is in prison, they say the reason was because of the revolution in Iran. Saddam feared that, the same revolution would emanate from Iraq, especially from the family of Hakim, because they were a scholarly family. So he imprisoned majority of them. A large portion of the Hakim family were imprisoned in one night. And they remained in prison for nearly a decade. When he was in prison, that didn't stop him from teaching or even learning about the religion of Islam. Just as how Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam enters the prison, he does not disqualify himself or from his responsibilities as being a Nabi. He teaches his companions in prison. Likewise, Sayyid Al-Hakim began teaching in the prisons. On the one hand, they say, and there are many different reports with regards to this, they say that between the prisoners they had one nuskha, one copy of the Holy Quran, and it was battered, ripped, but they put it together, and that was something that they would use amongst themselves. One of his prison mates has written a whole biography of Sayyid Al-Hakim. He says that one day he said to me, "Oh friend, open up Surah Al-Yusuf." He said, I opened up Surah Al-Yusuf. He said, because Sayyid Al-Hakim used to constantly recite Surah Al-Yusuf, without the intention of memorizing it, he just one day spontaneously began reciting the verses of Surah Al-Yusuf, from the beginning until the very end. In one sitting, he recited the whole of Surah Al-Yusuf, without him having memorized it from before. He said, yes, there were a few places, 2 or 3 places where he got stuck, but as a whole, the entire surah, which is above 100 verses or so, he says he began reciting in one sitting. How beautiful is this? You have a person who is imprisoned without justice, just as how Nabi Yusuf is imprisoned without justice. But then he would constantly refer back to the story of Nabi Yusuf and seek enlightenment from it. It would strengthen his heart. Today, many of us go through many different adversities and problems. And we resort to, for example, different ways of treating these problems. Sometimes we need to refer to the Quran and seek guidance from the Quran. Many of the prophets that have come before us, great personalities have come before us. who have gone through worse problems than what we're going through. We seek guidance and we seek spirituality from them. We seek answers and solutions from them. Just as how this Maraja sought guidance from the story of Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam. Beyond this, they say that he began teaching tafsir of the Holy Quran within the prisons. He said under the watchful eyes of the guards. Sayyid Al-Hakim, according to one report, they say he used to pretend praying salah. He used to pretend praying. He used to pretend engaging in dua. But in reality, he would be speaking to the people around him, teaching them tafsir of the Holy Quran. Some of his students, some of the people listening to him speak, they used to talk with one another, pretending to show the guards that they're engaged in whatever they're engaged in. But in reality, their mind was towards the Samahat Sayyid speaking and teaching the tafsir of the Holy Quran. Beyond this, they say he used to write his notes. Very beautiful part of his history. How did he write notes in prison? Paper wasn't available to him. Pens weren't available to him. They say, his prison mates, they say that he used to collect all of the cigarette boxes. Cigarette packs, empty cigarette packs of all of the prisoners. He would sit down, he would meticulously rip the cigarette packs until he was able to make paper the size of his palm. And he would mix water with whatever was found in the prison cells. He would create, for example, at times muddy water, at times something. He would mix certain elements together and he would use the bones of chicken bones, yes, to write with. Many a times he wrote notes in such a way. He wouldn't write, for example, the notes that you would find in a particular book, but bullet points, whatever it may be. He wrote notes which was sufficient for him. Within prison, he began teaching and he began writing ahadith. Many a times he would write ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam off memory. Remember, he's not sitting in a library where books are available to him. Everything was done off memory. He began writing ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt that speaks about sabr, that speaks about hilm, perseverance, that speaks about the thawab al-azim for those who go through injustice, that those who go through oppression. And he began circulating this with the prison mates. He would circulate these ahadith to help others ease their problems. Many a times they would come to him, they would sit, they would discuss their problems, their difficulties, their worries, their concerns, and he would counsel them. He would advise them. He would give them maw'idha, spiritual advices. Many of them referred to him for spiritual comfort, and they would sit with him. In prison, many of his prison mates were his family members, and just as how he used to teach them outside of prison, he began teaching them inside prison. Fiqh and usul al-fiqh, the two predominant studies in the Hawza, he continued in the prisons as well. He would teach all of his students how to extrapolate laws from the sources, from the original sources. And remember, all of this happens off head. All of this happens min dhahara qalbi, from memory. He begins to teach usul and usul al-fiqh. He begins to teach fiqh and usul al-fiqh. Magnificent. His notes on usul al-fiqh, when he came or when he was released out of prison, he published them, which are considered to be one of his predominant works, one of his most prominent works, Al-Kafi fi usul al-fiqh, the notes of which were written in prison. You find that within prison, when it came to days like Ashura, he would write the Maqtal of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, beginning from the story of when Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan died. Then he would speak about what transpired in Mecca, then what transpired in Medina, then Mecca, then Kufa, what happened with Muslim ibn Aqil, then what happened on the 10th of Muharram. He would mention the Maqtal of all of the companions, off head. Never would he refer to a book. He never had sources, he never had books to refer back to. He would refer everything from memory. He would speak about the companions and how they died and whom they were killed by. Then he would speak about the Maqtal of the Bani Hashim, one after another. Then he would speak about the Maqtal of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. Then he would speak about what happened in Kufa and Sham. Everything, all of that was something established within the prison cells. At times he wrote books. There were two particular treatises or rights that he wrote, one on Usul al-Amaliyah, one on Khums. But he had to destroy them because the guards had found out. When the guards found out, he had to destroy his notes so that he wouldn't get in trouble. At times you find that he would circulate. There are reports that he wrote, for example, the biographies of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam as well within the prisons. These were his struggles in prison. In 1991, he was released. When he was released, the people came towards him. After the death of Ayatollah Sayyid al-Khoi rahmatullah alayh, the people came towards him and they said to him, you know, we've been referring to you and your laws. Why don't you announce your marja'iyya? He was very hesitant at first, but then eventually he announced his marja'iyya. When he announced his marja'iyya, there was a lot of support from the people of Najaf. There was a lot of support from the other maraja as well, other scholars. And there was a lot of backing that he had. One of his first order of business was to rebuild the shrines in Najaf and Karbala. Whatever wealth that came towards him, apart from supporting the orphans and the families, will come to that, he began to use some of the finances to rebuild the shrines in Najaf and Karbala. The shrines that we see today, we owe it to him. It's part of his legacy that he leaves behind for us. Because he sees the importance of sanctifying the shrines of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. Just by entering the shrines, you feel that awe of spirituality, that deluge of spirituality. You don't feel like leaving. The majesty of Najaf al-Ashraf, the majesty of Karbala, the majesty of Qadimain. This is something that you will not find anywhere else in the world. Sayyid Al-Hakim made sure that the walls are rebuilt. There are many today who come forward and they say, we don't have a hadith from the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam that says that you should build shrines with such lavishness. The way Najaf has been built, well, look at the seerah of the Maraji themselves. Look at the seerah of Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id Al-Hakim. Is he not from the Ahl al-Hadith? Is he not from the Ahl al-Ilm? Did he do something that was against the religion of Islam? No, he made sure that the remembrance and the sanctity of the Ahl al-Bayt are preserved. He rebuilds Najaf, he rebuilds Karbala. With the finances and the khums that comes towards him, he supports thousands of families. The images that we see in his funeral, majority of them, the ulama, they were the people of Iraq. Because they benefited from it. Their parents, their grandparents, their uncles, their aunts, they all benefited from Sayyid Al-Hakim rahmatullah alayh. The khums that you and I pay, don't think that people, some of the nasty things that we hear nowadays circulating in our communities. You find that the khums that we pay, it is used to support many of these widows and orphans. Sayyid Al-Hakim himself, he was considered to be Ab Ruhi. He was considered to be a father for many of these orphans and a husband to many of these widows. And they are indebted to him. You find that beyond that, as a marja, he began working politically with the other maraja as well. And the intense respect that he showed towards them. Amongst the heritage that he leaves behind are his publications. We mentioned some of his books, some of the areas in which he authored, but there are other areas in which he is profoundly known for. In areas of usul al-fiqh and fiqh, he's known for that area. It's his speciality. But then you find that in areas of aqaid as well, he makes sure to publish his research in these areas as well. Amongst the people in the Shia world, they began asking questions. The maraji that we have today, why don't they write about aqidah? They're always focused on fiqh and fiqh and fiqh and usul al-fiqh. Where is the aqidah part of it? When the news reaches Samahat Sayyid, he publishes a book known as Usul al-Aqidah. When he talks about Tawheed, when he talks about Nabuwa, when he talks about Imama, when he talks about proving the wilayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu was salam, a profound book. And as a marja, he makes sure that his language is simple in that book, that even a common man is able to read it. Because sometimes when they write, it's only the people who have special knowledge in that particular field who can understand his language. He makes sure that when he writes this particular book, it's easy for the people to understand. They say there was a scholar in Jordan, a Sunni scholar from one of the universities in Jordan. He sent 10 questions to Samahat Sayyid. 10 questions. When it came to Shia Islam, 10 profound questions. Some of these questions are absolutely phenomenal. I'll give you an example. One question he asks the Sayyid. He says, look, we've heard that the Ahl Shia, they cursed the first three, Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman. He says, why do you curse them? Why do you disrespect them? And likewise, why do you disrespect Mu'mineen Aisha as well? Because we've heard these Shia conduct this behavior. But what is your opinion with regards to this? It's a powerful question. You and I get asked such questions. Imagine the Marja being asked the question. Imagine his answer. Another question he says that with regards to Ghadir Khum. You Shia believe that this Ghadir Khum, the traditions of Ghadir Khum is mutawatir. But this hadith is not found in our books. It's not reported very much in our books. So if it's mutawatir according to your standards, why isn't it mentioned within our books? Another question he asks, he says, Imam al-Mahdi, ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. He says, according to the Sunni opinion, he is one personality. According to the Shi'i opinion, he is another personality. Two completely different personalities. Is it possible, in your opinion, to say that the two opinions are correct for one individual? Can you join the two opinions? If you can't join the two opinions, then which opinion is closer to the reality? Another from amongst his questions, he says that you, the Imamiyya, believe that the Imam is chosen by Allah, and this is from His grace, His lutf, that in every day, in every time, there is an Imam. When there is an Imam, there is justice in this world, but there is no justice in this world. The Imam is not with us, he's in ghaibah. So does this go against the lutf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? These are hard-hitting questions, yes? These are powerful questions. He says that, for example, there's a book written by Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah wrote his book against, it was a rebuttal against Al-Hilli. Are there any scholars from amongst your madhab who have replied back to Ibn Taymiyyah? And then he begins to ask about the Sahaba and the adala, the justice of the Sahaba. Many of these questions were directed towards Samah Sayyid. Do you know what the Sayyid does? He answers each and every question. 10 questions is published as a 3-volume book today. He makes sure that when these questions are answered, they're answered mufassilan, with great detail, in depth, to the extent that the person who has sought these answers, there is no argument that they can give in return. Each question, each answer that he has written has traversed at least 50 pages or so. A 300-page book, 3-volume book has been published. Him just answering 10 questions. One of his other publications was with regards to his research in terms of what happened in Karbala. His entire examination of Karbala. I have heard from scholars, his students particularly, explain that his research on Karbala is a research that has not been done before. It's something new that he shared with the Ahl al-Ilm, with the ulama of his time. He begins to look at what caused the Ashura, what caused the movement of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, but from a new perspective. Then he begins to speak about the athar, the effects of Karbala. Then he begins to speak about our responsibilities as the people who established the Azza of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. What is our responsibility? And he begins to look into the different khutabat of the members of the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam. This book is known as Faji'at al-Taf. And you find that Samahat Sayyid Al-Hakim rahmatullah alayhi had a very dear heart and great support and empathy towards the movement of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam. And he supported all of the students at the time, made sure that the muballighin, they do their job in reviving the message of Ashura. Many a times in the house there were students who were not able to afford black clothes. So every time before Ashura he would distribute black clothes to the students of Najaf al-Ashraf, as well as those who are from the poor demographics of society. He would give away, for example, niyaz in the name of Aba Abdullah alayhi salam to hundreds of families. Hundreds, yes, thousands were supported by him on a daily basis, on a monthly basis. And his loss is a great loss to his society. And it's a great loss to us as Shi'as, because his knowledge has now stopped. As the hadith of the Imam alayhi salam explains, that when an alim passes away, a vacuum is created in this earth. And that vacuum can never be filled, not by another individual. And his loss is a tragic loss for us today. One of the fudala, one of our greatest maraja has passed away. When you look at the movement of Karbala and the movement of Abi Abdullah alayhi salam, what really reinforced the movement, one aspect that really reinforced the movement of Abu Abdullah alayhi salam was not his family members. Yes, they played a role and they preserved the message of Ashura and Karbala. But it wasn't the family members. It wasn't the children that were slaughtered. It wasn't, for example, the infant that was slaughtered. One of the most powerful reinforcements of his message and his movement were the ulama that stood alongside him. The companions that we very well know of and we are fond of, they weren't just normal individuals like you and I. They were considered to be ulama of Kufa, the likes of Anas ibn Harith. Yes, one of the ruwat of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. He used to narrate a hadith from the Prophet of Islam. Then you have the likes of Muslim ibn Awsaja. He was a scholar from amongst the people of Kufa. The likes of Habib ibn Madahir, he was a scholar from amongst the people of Kufa. The likes of Burayr, they say that on the 10th of Muharram when Burayr was slaughtered, the executioner of Burayr, he carries the head of Burayr towards the palace of Ibn Ziyad. When he goes towards the palace of Ibn Ziyad, he sees that the gates are closed, so he goes back to his home. When he enters his home, it's been a while since he's seen his wife. He says to his wife, "Oh my dear wife, I've come home with something that is greater than gold and silver." He says, "Oh my husband, what have you brought home?" When he opens the case, he shows her the head of Burayr. Burayr, they say he was Qari al-Quran. Kana yaqra'u al-Quran fi Jami' al-Kufa. He was one of the Qurra of the Holy Quran in Jami' al-Kufa, in Masjid al-Kufa. He taught Quran and the recitation of the Quran to many of the youngsters, many of the young generation. When his wife saw the head of Burayr, they say that her heart split open and she begins to cry. She begins to lament. She says, "Oh my husband, tell me, are you the one who executed this man who was known to recite the Quran, the one who taught many of the youngsters in Kufa the Quran?" When she knew that her husband was the one who executed Burayr, she says to him, "Wallah, from this day never will I say a word to you, my husband." And she leaves him. There and then in that space, in that spot, she leaves him. She packs her things and she leaves. Then you have the likes of Muslim ibn Awsaja. Habib ibn Madahir was sitting alongside him in his final moments. Habib says to him, "Ya Muslim, wallah, if I had not known that I would join you shortly, I would have asked you, Ya Muslim, what is your wasiyah for me? Oh Muslim, what is your wasiyah for me?" And I would make sure that it's executed. Muslim turns to him, he says, "Ya Habib, I do have one wasiyah for you." He says, "Ya Muslim, tell me, what is it?" He says, "Ya Habib," pointing towards Abu Abdullah, he says, "Ya Habibi, Ya Habib." He says, "Protect him, defend him, give your life for him and his message." Habib ibn Madahir then enters the battlefield. When he enters the battlefield, he fights valiantly. He kills 63 from the enemies until one man came towards him from behind him and stabbed him in his back. Another man then came and struck him with his sword on his head. They say that Habib then fell from his horse onto the sands of Karbala. When he fell from his horse onto the sands of Karbala, an old man weakened, an old man tired, thirsty, he tries to get on his feet, but then one of these men returned and strikes him on his neck, severing his head. Abu Abdullah, when he sees this, he says, "Inda Allahi ahtasibu nafsi wa humat ashabi." He says, "Ya Allah, I turn to you with hope that you will
in hope that you will seek retribution for my murder and the murder of my companions. They say after these two individuals, they began fighting with one another. One of them would say to the other that I was the one who separated the head of Habib. I deserve the gold and the silver from Ibn Ziyad. The other would say, no, I helped you. At least let me carry the head of Habib. Let me hang the head of Habib from my horse, so I could tell the people of Kufa that I helped you.
Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون وآخر الدعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصل اللهم على محمد وآله الطاهرين. مات بحسين.
Keep it a bit up. سجاد میں زینب ہوں میرے سر پہ ردا کوئی نہیں بازار جفا سجاد میں زینب ہوں میرے سر پہ ردا کوئی نہیں مجمع ہے کوفیوں کا میرے چلنے کی جا کوئی نہیں بازار جفا سجاد میرے سر سے آدھا نچنی چادر پلوے میں نبی زادی پھروائی گئی در در مل جائے ردا مجھ کو اور میری دعا کوئی نہیں بازار جفا سجاد چلو کیسے لاکھوں ہے تماشائی یاد آتا ہے رہ رہ کے عباس میرا بھائی فریاد کروں کس سے اب تیرے سوا کوئی نہیں بازار جفا سجاد میرے دل کو یہ درد ستاتا ہے سر غازی کے نیزے سے جب خاک پہ آتا ہے سر میرا کھلا دیکھے غم سے بڑا کوئی نہیں معلوم ہاتا تو غازی کی بہن ہوں میں بے دست ہے وہ غازی پابندی رسن ہوں میں یاد آئی وفا اس کی جب پاس رہا کوئی نہیں بازار جفا مجبور ہوں بے بس ہوں میں رو بھی نہیں سکتی
تروں کی اذیت سے میں سو بھی نہیں سکتی، اس درجہ مصیبت میں ہمدرد میرا کوئی نہیں، بازار جفا سجادی تیری حالت دیکھی نہیں جاتی ہے، بے پردہ مجھے دیکھے یہ بات رلاتی ہے، سجادی تیری طرح کانٹوں پہ چلا کوئی نہیں، موت آئے کی زندہ میں میری بالی سکینہ کو، کیا جا کے بتاؤں گی بیمار مدینہ کو، غم دل پہ اتانے کو اب باقی بچا کوئی نہیں، چاہتا ہے سوئے زندہ اب کنبہ محمد کا، رسی میں بندہ قیدی کانٹوں سے بڑا رستا، امت نے ستم دائے قسمت سے گلا کوئی نہیں، بازار ستم میں سا زینب کا جب عالم، مظہر میں لکھوں کیسے ظالم نے کہا جس دم، ہے کون تیرا وارث زینب نے کہا کوئی نہیں، بازار جفا سجاد میں زینب ہوں میرے سر پہ ردا کوئی نہیں، بازار جفا
زيارة وارثة عظم الله أجرنا وأجركم بمصابنا بالحسين عليه السلام، وجعلنا وإياكم من الطالبين بثاره مع ولي الإمام المهدي من آل بيت محمد عليهم الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله، السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله، السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله، السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله، السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله، السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله، السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى، السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء، السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور، أشهد أنك قد قمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين، فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مذلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سلم وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. زيادة حضرت علي أكبر. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. زيادة شهداء كربلاء. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الزكي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله. بأبي أنتم وأمي تبتم، وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم، وفزتم فوزا عظيما. فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. زيادة أبو الفضل العباس. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما، وأقدمهم إيمانا، وأقومهم بدين الله، وأحوطهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك، فنعم الأخ المواصي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. اللهم